Hey everybody, I have a video here for you today, and I came across this story while researching a video I'm going to be uploading in the next day or so, but I find this to be just an absolutely incredible story. Pretty disgusting, probably the darkest hour in the history of the popes, and it was so incredible I thought I would share it today. And the headline, or the title of this article, really says it all, but this is atlasobscura.com. I will leave the link below. And this is entitled The Cadaver Synod, When a Pope's Corpse was Put on Trial. I'm just going to skip ahead a little here and start reading. The trial was called the Cadaver Synod, or the Synodus Horrenda. It ushered in one of the most corrupt eras in the history of the papacy, a time that's now referred to in all seriousness as the pornocracy. And I have read a little bit of the history of the popes and what they were accused of in this time. And that title, Pornocracy, is right on, and I'm not going to go into the details because it's rather salacious and lurid. But it says, to understand what happened to Pope Formosus' unfortunate corpse, you have to understand that the world around him was falling apart. The Western Empire Charlemagne had united had since crumbled away into smaller and smaller factions. Little fiefdoms were eyeing Rome's treasure and demanding protection money while the city was still smarting from the Caesarean sack of 846. Rifts formed within the church as the men who aspired to be pope found they needed the additional strength of one of the many secular leaders to achieve it. The story of the corpse trial actually starts during the reign of Pope John VIII. At this time, Formosus was a bishop of Porto, a Roman suburb. He was also a successful missionary known for spreading Catholicism throughout the Bulgar kingdom. He might have been a little too good at his job. Pope John VIII turned on Formosus and accused him of violating a law that prevented bishops from ruling over more than one place at a time, a law that was supposed to prevent bishops from building up their own little fiefdoms. And perhaps more tellingly, John accused Formosus of violating a recently passed law that forbid openly aspiring to the papacy. Formosus was getting a little too close for comfort, so John had him excommunicated. As it turns out, John's paranoia was justified. He was the first pope to be murdered by his own people. At first he was poisoned, but the poisoner lost patience waiting for the potion to take effect, and bashed John in the head with a hammer. After John's death, the papacy had such a high turnover rate, it's a wonder anyone wanted the job at all. Marinus I succeeded John and reinstated Formosus as bishop. The following year, Pope St. Adrian III succeeded Marinus, but barely lasted a year before being assassinated himself. Pope Stephen V followed shortly thereafter. Finally, in 891, it was Formosus' turn. He managed to hold on to the papacy for 5 turbulent years before dying of a stroke. His successor, Boniface VI, was elected quickly to squelch riots, but he was an odd choice. He had been defrocked twice for immoral conduct. He only ruled for 15 days before he either died of gout or was poisoned himself. Next up was Pope Stephen VI. Less than a year into his papacy, he gave the order to dig up Formosus and force his corpse to stand trial for the crimes Pope John VIII had excommunicated him for, seeking the papacy and ruling over more than one place at a time as a bishop. Now, Stephen VI's reason for desecrating this poor corpse could have been to shore up some political alliances with a faction that hated Formosus, but more than likely it was to cover up for the fact that Stephen was guilty of the exact same things he was accusing Formosus of. Formosus had made Stephen bishop, and Stephen had become Bishop of Rome while he still held that post. But if Formosus could be found guilty of that same crime, his actions would be null, and Stephen wouldn't have been bishop when he was elected pope. Stephen also might have been completely insane. So the corpse of Formosus was dragged out, dressed in papal robes, and propped up in a chair at San Giovanni Laterano. Ironically, poor Formosus' name means good-looking, though by then he was a horrific sight. Really, you think? He had only been dead for 9 months. A deacon was appointed to speak for him. Now, can you just imagine that sight? The corpse of a pope and a deacon was appointed to speak for him? Can you just imagine that scene? But predictably, didn't say much while Stephen screamed at the corpse. At one point in the trial, an earthquake shook the basilica, damaging part of it. But even in the face of this ominous sign, Formosus was found guilty of all counts, stripped of his vestments, and had 3 fingers he used for blessing on his right hand chopped off. And in other accounts that I've read of this trial of the corpse of Formosus, Pope Stephen VI accused him of perjury. He accused the dead corpse of perjury. You just can't make this up. Stephen had him buried on an obscure plot of land, but then, thinking better of it, had him dug up one more time and tossed in the Tiber. At this point, the people of Rome had just about enough of Stephen and his corpse trial. A mob threw him in prison where he was strangled in his cell. Later that year, San Giovanni Laterano was nearly destroyed by a fire as to rid itself of the whole nasty business. The next pope, Pope Romanus, annulled all the actions of Stephen VI, but was overthrown in less than a year. His successor, Pope Theodore II, was only pope for 20 days, yet managed to recover the body of Formosus. His successor, John IX, oversaw Formosus' reburial in St. Peter's Cathedral. Today there is still a monument that lists the name of the popes buried there. There you can see Formosus' name carved in stone, one of the last vestiges of the Cadaver Synod. So, I just thought I would bring you this strange story, this darkest hour of the history of the popes coming from about 1120 years ago. This was the Cadaver Synod, when a pope's corpse was put on trial. You can't make this stuff up. It's part Weekend at Bernie's and part just strange history of the church. And I found this story when I was researching information for my next video. And as many of you know, I have made videos on the Shroud of Turin, and I've gotten more than a few messages or questions. Well, who do you think was on the Shroud of Turin? And I found the answer. And it comes from the Fathers of the Church from 1700 years ago. They tell us exactly who was on the Shroud of Turin. And I will bring that video to you in the next few days. If you are interested in that, the Fathers of the Church give us the answer. Well, I just hope you thought this strange video was interesting. You have a nice day.